And we'll be looking at the scriptures involved in that. Just want to read, beginning with verse 11 of Numbers chapter 10. Numbers 10. And beginning with verse 11. On the 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle of the testimony. Then the Israelites set out from the desert of Sinai and traveled from place to place until the cloud came to rest in the desert of Paran. They set out this first time at the Lord's command through Moses. I'll stop there, reading of God's Word, and we'll be looking at several passages and sections as we do this survey of the Bible. We're in Numbers. Well, I don't know about you, but I like road trips. Have you ever taken a road trip with your family, like on vacation, as a child, or maybe taken your kids on a road trip? And, you know, a lot of interesting things happen, don't they, when you're in the car with the kids on the road. You know, it's like we build all kinds of memories. It's like I've got sometimes more memories of the trip than I do of the vacation after we got there. I mean, that's really strange, isn't it? But certain things just stick in my mind. Some good, some bad. Maybe you've taken a trip to the Grand Canyon or to Yellowstone or to the white beaches of Destin, Florida, or wherever. Maybe it was someplace in Iowa, but it seemed like a long trip. Well, when I was a child, we traveled several times with my parents, my brother and I, and my grandparents to Phoenix, Arizona, to visit my aunt and uncle in Phoenix. And, you know, we didn't have, you know, iPads, and we didn't have a TV screen, you know, in a van, and we didn't have all the games that, you know, you can play on your, you know, Nintendo or whatever. But it, I guess, is Nintendo the outdated? Is that outdated? What do you play now? Ethan? What? Oh, on your iPhone. Right, okay, sorry. The games are on the iPhone. I don't play games on my iPhone, but anyway, they're there. And the kids do that. But you know what we did have? We had Grandpa and Grandma Snyder. You know them. And you know, my Grandma Snyder, before we were even out of the city limits, she'd start pulling out these butterscotch candies. Oh, she had a whole bag of them. And then hard-boiled eggs, sandwiches, and she'd have food for everybody. She had this big stash of food that she brought on our trips, and we just couldn't wait to see what Grandma had in her bag. And so we'd set off in, you know, my dad's 1955 Buick Special, and this is a big car. And we had plenty of room for my grandpa and grandma and our the four of us and our family. And I just remember that one of the things that happened that struck me along the road was when we were in, it was in the winter time, and we were in a cold section of New Mexico, and we stopped at this little dinky gas station because everybody had to go to the bathroom. And I went around behind my grandpa to a side door, and it was open. And then I'm looking at my grandpa, and I'm saying, what's taking you so long? And he's sitting there prying on the lid, and when I walk in, his eyesight wasn't that good, and I could see that he was prying on a big chunk of ice that had overflown over the toilet. So, you know, there's no way he was ever going to get it up, and it didn't work anyway, so we all get back to the car, and when we tell the story, we laugh so hard that I don't know, it was my mom or grandma wet her pants or something. But, stories like that, they stick in your mind, And then when my brother Ronnie and I would start fighting in the back seat sometimes if we were, and, I know this never happened to your families, but, my dad once in a while, he'd reach back and give us a swat to make us behave and quit fighting. And so you have those things that go on. And then sometimes you get on the wrong road. Now, there's nothing more frustrating. I remember we were coming back from Worthington, Minnesota, visiting my parents, and we're headed back to northern Michigan, and we've been going for like 8 hours, and I asked Carol to drive because I wanted to sleep, and so she drives. I wake up 2 hours later, and we're headed to Detroit. We didn't want to go to Detroit. We wanted to go up to Grand Rapids, Michigan, And there's nothing more frustrated after you're tired. I was not a happy camper, believe me. But now just picture about 2 million people. You're the driver, Moses, and you got 2 million people in the back seat whining and complaining. I mean, this is an impossible task to lead 2 million people, 1 to 3 million, they estimate, but whatever it was. And the driver keeps saying that he was handed down these promises and his ancestors received it, 650 years ago. And you're going to this great place, and you don't know where it is. You don't know when you're going to get there, and everybody's complaining. And you're supposed to be patient and trust God. Well, that's kind of the situation here as we look at what's happening as they cross this wilderness. Now, at first there was all kinds of excitement, I'm sure. Everybody's excited to go on a road trip, right? We all are. Well, God gives them instructions, and they're divided up into the 12 tribes of the sons of Jacob, each tribe, and they're given these, they make a big banner, they got a banner, they're to make these trumpets, and when they hear the trumpet blast, they were to pack up and get ready to move, and then they had this divine GPS, a big cloud, and when the cloud moved, they moved. When the cloud stopped, they stopped. Wow, pretty cool. Well, God had rescued his people out of slavery, and they were finally on their way. And, I'm sure they were all excited, but those seemingly, exciting days lasted for about 3 days. And then people start to complain. In Numbers chapter 10, the Bible points out the glorious picture of each tribe leading, and they're going out tribe by tribe. And then in chapter 11 of Numbers, we read this. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. So for only a short time were they able to enter into the upper story of God's plan. And then they're right back down, whining and complaining because things were not going so well. And the road was tough. It was hot. It was dusty. And they weren't sure about this big trip anymore. Well, we see Israel's 3 complaints to Moses in Numbers chapter 11 and 12. They first complained just about the general hardships of the trip. This is a hot, dusty hike through the desert of Paran. And when I thought about this situation, it really reminded me about life. Isn't that kind of what life is like? I mean, things get hard on the trip. Things don't go so smoothly in life. There is a lot of dust and dirt and a lot of problems that arise in our life as we make this journey through life. And sometimes it's hard to trust God, to really believe that He is going to be faithful, that He is blessing us, and He is still with us through the hard times when we really can't see it. God had showed them so many times in so many ways that He was faithful. He had delivered them out of slavery in Egypt. He had worked so many miracles in front of them. And yet, isn't it true that it's so hard to give God the glory and to remember those good things when we are going through the desert? When life is hard? It's tough. And so God's anger, He is aroused, and they start complaining. And God sends this fire to the outskirts of the camp. And Moses had to pray for them. And then the fire receded. And then they complain about the food. You know, every day. Manna. Manna, 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 manna. I'm sick and tired of manna. You know, God provided it for them. They needed food out in that wilderness. And yet they start, the rabble, it says, with them, began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but manna. Isn't that amazing? How we have selective memory at times. You know, never mind about the fact that we were slaves. Never mind that the Pharaoh over us was actually killing our male babies. We had a free giveaway program there. The food was at no cost. That's what we remember. Free food. You know, it's amazing how we too can forget the grace and the blessings of God when things get difficult. Then later, even Miriam and Aaron complain about Moses being the driver of this trip, the leader. Numbers 12, 1-3. Miriam and Aaron, his own brother and sister, began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? They asked. Hasn't He also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. See, not only were they challenging God's judgment of putting Moses as the leader and choosing him, they really were doubting that God was with them by this, by complaining about Moses. If they had, they would have dared, they were really openly questioning God's wisdom. But God was with them, and God was not about to let an act of rebellion like this go unnoticed. And God tells Moses to bring Miriam and Aaron Miriam into this tabernacle, and he meets with them there. And then we read in Numbers 12, verses 6-8, he said, listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And then God leaves, but not before inflicting Miriam with leprosy. And Aaron begs Moses to pray for them, to pray for Miriam. And he does pray for Miriam. And God heals her, but she is required to stay out of the camp for 7 days. See, when we read about these three incidents, from the Lori story perspective, it's tempting to think that, well, you know, isn't God kind of mean? I mean, does he enjoy punishing people? Why is he so upset about Miriam and Aaron complaining and grumbling against Moses? Can you blame them? What's the harm of grumbling to each other? Well, from the upper story perspective, there's plenty wrong with it. God is building a special nation, one that was to be different from every other nation in the world. And he wanted a people who were not like everybody else, that they didn't just complain against God and question God and get jealous and envious. God's nation was to reflect the character of God. Then the nations around them were to see their relationship with God and say, wow, He is the true God. There's something different here. He's just not another idol. He's not just a God among gods. He is a righteous and holy God. And such a nation could only succeed if the people placed their complete trust and confidence in God, even when it didn't make sense to them. For the Israelites, wandering in the wilderness with only manna to eat was not their idea of being a chosen nation. The lower story expectations got in their way of their upper story expectations. Can you relate to that? Maybe it's unemployment. Maybe it's a troubled marriage. Maybe it's painful illness. Maybe it's stress-producing kids. Maybe it's worrisome bills. But don't we start to question, is God with us? Is He here or not? Is He leading me or not? Is He sovereign and in control or not? And we too need to be reminded that even when there are problems in life, even when there are struggles, even when it's hard, that even in those times, God is building our character. He is helping us to become more like Him. Isn't it true? It is for me that when I'm going through struggles, when I'm going through problems, I cry out to God more, not less. I am drawn to God more. I see my need for God more. And God works in me, helping me to become more like Him through the struggles, even more than through all the good times. Well, we see Israel takes a dangerous wrong turn at Kadesh Barnea, Numbers 13. Remember the spies, a man from each tribe, they're sent out to surveil, which is a fancy term for observe the land. I put that, I got that word in there for Joel and my wife and some who may be shocked that I even know what it means, or, but anyway, they surveilled the land, they observed the land, they explored it. And what happens? Well, these 12 men, we read in chapter 13, verse 27, they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large, and even the descendants of Enoch are there. They were giants. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. And the 10 spies, they report about the abundance of the land and also the giants in the land, and their conclusion is, we cannot take it. We can't. But 2 of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, they come to a different conclusion. They see the very same things, the very same abundance in the land, the very same giants and fortified cities in the land. And they say in chapter 13, we can. For we can certainly do it. Verse 30. Verse 31, the 10 men, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. I don't know about you, but I just love those 2 guys, Caleb and Joshua. I love people like that, don't you? Who say we can when everybody else is saying we can't. Don't you love those people? I mean, they're the people of faith who stand up at a congregational meeting. After everybody else has talked, everybody said why the church can't grow, why we can't build, why we can't make the budget, why we can't build the youth group, why the teens are leaving, and that we could